Lesson 1-1 Our Island Earth. Like all species on Earth, humans rely on a healthy, functioning planet for air, water, food, and shelter. So, what is environmental science? Environmental science is the study of our planet's natural systems and how humans and the environment affect one another. The environment includes all living and non living things with which organisms interact. You may also hear the environment referred to as the ecosystem. Understanding the interactions between humans and the environment is the first step in solving environmental problems. Environmental science versus environmentalism. Environmental science, the objective is an unbiased pursuit of knowledge about the workings of the environment and our interactions with it. So, unbiased means that we're not on one side or the other. We just want to know, how does everything work? How do we interact with our ecosystem? Environmentalism is a social movement dedicated to protecting the natural world. Natural resources. Natural resources are materials and energy sources found in nature that humans need to survive. Sometimes you'll just hear them referred to as resources, which are necessities of life. Resources can be divided into two categories: renewable and non-renewable. Renewable resources are naturally replenished over short periods of time. So we can see in the diagram below sunlight, wind energy, wave energy from the ocean, and geothermal energy from the earth. Non-renewable resources are naturally formed more slowly than we can use them. So if you look at the far right, the non-renewable natural resources are oil and gas and coal, and then also other metals. Renewable resources can become non-renewable if used faster than they are replenished. So if you look at the middle picture there, this is what they're talking about. Fresh water, so the amount of fresh water on Earth could be used at a faster rate in which it can be made. Forest products, so they're talking about trees. Agricultural crops, so wheat, corn, things that are the basis of a lot of food sources for many societies. And soils, so talking about the nutritional value of the soils, the nutrients that are dissolved in the soils, so they can be depleted at a faster rate if you have over harvesting, over planting of particular areas. Human population growth. Tremendous and rapid human population growth can be attributed to, first, the agricultural revolution. So if you look at the world population growth, it was very slow for a very long period of time. But the first big boost that we see there is the agricultural revolution. Now, the agricultural revolution is a shift from people basically being hunters and gatherers to being able to grow their own foods and live in communities and be able to rely on each other. So, about 10,000 years ago, humans began living in villages, had longer lifespans, and more surviving children. Then we see that the population boosts. There is a little bit of decline there with the bubonic plague, and then this upward tick, which is called exponential growth, and that is due to the Industrial Revolution. So, beginning in the early 1700s, driven by fossil fuels and technology advances. So, technology advances and the fossil fuels, but also what comes along with that are improvements in medicine, which can prolong life and decrease the mortality rate in children. And did you know that the human population increases by about 200,000 people every day? So, again, that's called exponential growth, a population explosion. Ecological footprints. So, this is a term that you hear a lot, or you might hear the term carbon footprint. So, ecological footprints, the total amount of land and water required to provide the raw materials an individual or a population consumes. So, a population could be a population of humans, could be a population of trees, could be a population of some other plant or some other animal. It also is the total amount of land and water required to dispose of or recycle the waste an individual or population consumes. And it is most informative when footprints are calculated using the same method. And did you know, by one calculation, the ecological footprint of the average American is 3.5 times the global average? We must use a lot. The tragedy of the commons describes a situation in which resources made available to everyone and are used unsustainably and eventually depleted. Resource management, whether voluntary or mandated, can help avoid resource depletion. So, lesson 1.2, the nature of science. The word science comes from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge. What science is and what science is not. Science is an organized way of studying the natural world and the knowledge gained from such studies. Science assumes that the natural world functions in accordance with rules that do not change. Science does not deal with the supernatural. Science relies on evidence from measurements and from observations. Scientists' ideas are supported, not proven, and accepted, not believed in. The process of science. Science involves asking questions, making observations, seeking evidence, sharing ideas, and analyzing results. So basically following the scientific method. Science is not linear. The process loops back on itself and follows many different paths. So creating a new hypothesis if your conclusion to your experiment is not what you expected, not what you needed, or not what you wanted. Science is dynamic, which means it's constantly changing. It's a creative endeavor. Exploration and discovery. Many investigations start with the observation of a phenomenon that the scientist wishes to explain. Observations can be made with the eye, with instruments, or by reading scientific literature. Observations can happen unexpectedly or be planned. Observations often lead to questions and may be shared with colleagues. Hypothesis. So, a hypothesis, the word is singular. Hypotheses, as you see it here, is plural, so more than one hypothesis. Scientists attempt to answer questions by devising hypotheses, which are testable ideas. Hypotheses explain a phenomenon or answer a scientific question. They generate predictions that can be checked with models or direct observation. They can be supported or rejected by data and may prompt new hypotheses. So your hypothesis is your attempt at answering a question about the natural world. That question is answered by your experiment and conclusion. Gathering data. Scientists test predictions by gathering evidence in the form of data. So data is just information gathered from an experiment. If the data matches predictions, the hypothesis is supported. If it does not, the hypothesis is rejected. Data can come from an experiment or observational studies. Ideally, experiments and studies are controlled and repeated, again, using the scientific method. Did you know that gulls are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and the government agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service continually collect data on seagull populations and habitats? Lesson 1.3, the community of science. Scientific research does not stop with the scientific method. In order to have any impact, scientists must share their work at conferences and in journals. They receive and incorporate feedback. Community analysis and feedback. After completing their study, scientists present their work and get feedback from other researchers at conferences. They can write papers about their study, and they can submit papers for publication in a scientific journal. Many journals are peer-reviewed, meaning that scientists review the papers submitted for publication and recommend changes. Replication and self-correction. Hypotheses should be tested several times in several ways before they are accepted. So it means multiple trials, multiple experiments. Interpretations of data can change over time as knowledge accumulates. Sometimes reinterpretations can be drastic, but most of the time they are minor adjustments. And science constantly refines and improves itself. So, did you know that scientists believed the sun and planets revolved around the earth until Nicolaus Copernicus proved that this was false in the 1500s? Scientific theory building. A hypothesis is a testable explanation for a narrow set of phenomenon, while a theory is a broader explanation for a wider range of observations. So both hypotheses and theories must be testable. A hypothesis has not yet been supported by data because hypothesis becomes before the experiment, which is the test. And theories have many data supporting their hypotheses. Building on environmental science. Addressing environmental problems involves more than just understanding science. It involves ethics, culture, and the worldview. So when you're talking about ethics, you could be talking about anthropocentrism, which is humans and human welfare is the most important thing. Biocentrism, all living things have value. Some may have more value than others or more importance than others, and ecocentrism is the well-being of species or community is more important than that of the individual. Environmental justice movement is recognizing the quality of life and how it's connected to environmental quality.